cut stone. Heights up, give thanks to life.
Woman of creation, take it or leave it. She's blessed,
She's blessed.
strong black woman, whoa. One day we love her come down. Black woman, strong woman. She's like the rising sun.
One thing that I became aware of in my traveling recently through Africa and the Middle East, in every country that you go to, usually the degree of progress can never be separated from the woman. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. If you're in a country that reflects the consciousness toward the importance of education, it's because the woman is aware of the importance of education. But in every backward country, you'll find the women are backward. And in every country where education is not stressed, it's because the women don't have education. So one of the things I became thoroughly convinced of in my recent travels is the importance of giving freedom to the woman, giving her education, and giving her the incentive to get out there and put that same spirit and understanding into children. And I frankly am proud of the contribution that our women have made in the struggle for freedom. And I'm one person who's for giving them all of the leeway possible, because they've made a greater contribution than many of us men. And one of the best ways that they can help is to encourage the man, try and inspire him to be more militant, and turn him away from being non-violent, passive, and meek, and Uncle Thomas. You make him aware that the black woman wants to see her man be a man, instead of around here using religion as an excuse to be a coward, and some of the things that he's been reflecting here lately.
In our previous film, in the historic role of African women, talking mostly about the female deities and goddesses that were prevalent throughout traditional African society and ancient African society, we also talked about the societal structure of the Council of Elders, and each element that always represented one man and woman. Now we focus on the military commanders and leaders, the political leaders of the traditional African society and ancient African society, where women play a very, very prominent role. Yaa Asantewaa, who once said, "I must say this, if you men of the Ashanti won't go forward, then we will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight the white man. We will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefields." Yaa Asantewaa was the queen mother of the Eweso tribe of the Ashanti in what is modern Ghana. She was an exceptionally brave fighter who in March of 1900 led and raised an army of thousands against the British colonial forces in Ghana in their efforts to subjugate the Asante and seize the golden stool. The Asante nation's spiritual symbol of unity and sovereignty. Yaa Asantewaa mobilized the Asante troops and for 3 months laid siege to the British fort of Kumasi. The British colonizers had to bring in several thousand troops and artillery to break up the siege, exiling Queen Yaa Asantewaa and 15 of her closest associates to the Seychelles. She lived in exile until her death in October 1921. Yaa Asantewaa's war, as it is presently known in Ghana, was one of the last major wars on the continent of Africa led by a woman. The Dahomey Amazons, or Mino, was an all-female military regiment of the Fan people of the Kingdom of Dahomey in the present-day Republic of Benin. They existed from the 17th century to the end of the 19th century, while European narratives refer to the women soldiers as Amazons because of their similarity to the semi-mythical Amazons of ancient Anatolia. They call themselves Ahosi, king's wives, or Mino, our mothers, in the Fang language. The Ahosi were extremely well trained and inculcated with a very aggressive attitude. They were ferocious fighters with a reputation of decapitating soldiers in the middle of the battlefield, as well as those who were unfortunate to become their captives. Sedong Hongbe was one of the greatest leaders of the Mino, In 1851, she led an army of 6,000 women against the Egba fortress of Ibekwa. Because the Mino were armed with spears, bows, and swords, while the Egba had European cannons. Only about 1,200 survived the extended battle. European encroachment into West Africa gained pace towards the latter half of the 19th century. In 1890, King Benhazen used the Mino fighters alongside the male soldiers to battle the French forces during the First Franco-Dahomeyan War. The French army lost several battles to them because of the female warriors were skilled in battle. Queen Nanny, a Jamaican national hero, was a well-known leader of the Jamaican Maroons in the 18th century. Nanny was kidnapped from Ghana, West Africa, as a child and was forced into slavery in Jamaica. Growing up, she was influenced by the Maroons and other leaders of the enslaved Africans. The Maroon people were enslaved blacks who fled the oppressive plantations and formed their own communities in Jamaica's interior. Nanny and her brothers ran away from the plantation and hid in the Blue Mountains area. From there, they led several revolts across Jamaica. Queen Nanny was a well-respected, intelligent, spiritual leader who was instrumental in organizing the plans to free enslaved Africans. Fighting for her people for over 70 years, and for over 30 years she freed more than 800 slaves and helped them settle into maroon communities. She defeated the British in many battles, and despite repeated attacks from the British soldiers, Queen Nanny's settlement, called Nannytown, remained under Maroon control for several years. Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Harriet Ross, was an African-American abolitionist, humanitarian, and Union spy during the American Civil War. Born into slavery, Tubman escaped to Philadelphia in 1849, then immediately returned to Maryland to rescue her family. She subsequently made more than 19 missions to rescue more than 300 slaves with the help of the network of anti-slavery activists and safe houses known as the Underground Railroad. She later helped recruit men for John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry to free enslaved blacks. In June 1963, Tubman became the first woman to lead an armored expedition in the Civil War. She guided the Kobani River Raid, which liberated more than 700 enslaved blacks in South Carolina, the largest liberation of enslaved black people in American history. Amanirenas was one of the greatest candidates or queen mothers who ruled over the Meroitic kingdom of Kush in northeast Africa. She reigned over the kingdom between 40 BC to 10 BC. When Roman Emperor Augustus levied a tax on the Kushites in 24 BC, Amanirenas and her son Akhenadad led an army of 30,000 men to sack the Roman fort in the Egyptian city of Aswan. They also destroyed the statues of Caesar and Elephantine. Under orders from Augustus, the Roman general Petronius retaliated but met strong resistance from Amanirenas and her troops. After over 3 years of harsh fighting, the two parties agreed to negotiate a peace treaty. The Romans agreed to return their army to Egypt, withdraw their fort, give back the land to the Kushites, and rescind the tax. The brave warrior queen, Amanirenas, is remembered for her loyal combat side by side with her own soldiers. She was blinded in one eye after she was wounded by a Roman. Carlota was kidnapped from her Yoruba tribe, brought in chains to Cuba as a child, and forced into slavery in the city of the Matanas, working to harvest and process sugarcane under the most brutal of conditions. She was bright, musical, determined, and clever. In 1843, she and another enslaved woman named Fermina led an organized rebellion at the Triumvirato sugar plantation. Fermina was locked up after her plans for the rebellion were discovered. Using talking drums to secretly communicate, Carlota and her female warriors freed Fermina and dozens of others, and went on to wage a well-organized armed uprising against at least 5 brutal slave plantation operations in the area. Carlota's brave battle went on for 1 year before she was captured, tortured, and executed by the Spanish landowners. Queen Nzinga was a highly intelligent and powerful 17th century ruler of Ndago and Mataba kingdoms, modern-day Angola. Around the turn of the 17th century, Nzinga fearlessly and cleverly fought for the freedom of her kingdoms against the Portuguese, who were colonizing the Central African coast at the time to control the trade of African human beings. To build up her kingdom's military might, Nzinga offered sanctuary to runaway enslaved African people and Portuguese-trained African soldiers. She stirred up rebellion among the people still left in Ndongo, by then ruled by the Portuguese. Nzinga also formed an alliance with the Dutch against the Portuguese. However, their combined forces were not enough to drive the Portuguese out. After retreating to Matamba again, Nzinga started to focus on developing the kingdom as a trading power and a gateway to the Central African interior. At the time of Nzinga's death in 1661 at the age of 81, Matamba had become a powerful kingdom that managed to resist Portuguese colonization attempts from an extended period of time. Her kingdom was only integrated into Angola in the late 19th century. Nyabingi, Muhumusa, and Kaigirwa. Muhumusa and Kaigirwa were feared leaders of the East African Nyabingi priestess group that was influential in Rwanda and Uganda from 1850 to 1950. In 1911, Muhumusa proclaimed she would drive out the Europeans and that the bullets of the Wazunga would turn to water against her. She organized armed resistance against German colonists and was eventually detained by the British in Kampala, Uganda, from 1913 to her death in 1945. She became the first in a line of rebel priestesses fighting colonial domination in the name of Nyabingi. And even after being imprisoned, she inspired a vast popular following. The British passed its 1912 Witchcraft Act in direct response to the political effectiveness of the spirituality-based resistance movement. In 1917, the Nyabingi, Kaigirwa, followed in Muhumusa's footsteps and engineered the Nyakishinyi revolt with unanimous public support. British officials placed a high price on her head, but no one would claim it. After the British attacked the Congo camp of Kaigirwa in July 1919, killing most of the men, Kaigirwa and the main body of fighters managed to evade the army and escape. However, the British captured the sacred white sheep and burned it to the dust before a convocation of leading chiefs. After this deed, a series of disasters afflicted the district commissioner who killed the sheep. His herd was wiped out, his roof caved in, and a mysterious fire broke out in his house. Kaigirwa attempted another uprising, then went in the hills where she was never captured. Tarenorerer of Emu Bay in northern Tasmania was an indigenous Australian leader of the Tomogini people. In her teens, she was abducted by the Aborigines of Port Sora region and sold to white sealers on the Bass Strait Islands, where they called her Waller. She became proficient in English and took particular notice to the use and operation of firearms. In 1828, Tarenorerer returned to her country in the north of Tasmania, where she gathered a group of men and women from many bands to initiate warfare against the invading Europeans. Training her warriors in the use of firearms, she ordered them to strike the Luta, Tawin, white men, when they were at their most vulnerable, between the time that their guns were discharged and before they were able to reload. She also instructed them to kill the European sheep and bullocks. G.A. Robinson, who was charged with rounding up the Aborigines, was told by sealers that Tarenorerer would stand on a hill to organize the attack, abuse the settlers, and dare them to come and be speared.